Pam Bondi tried to interrupt Jasmine Crockett on live TV, expecting to silence her. What she didn't expect was a calm, fact-laced response that flipped the entire room, and the internet, on its head. The studio lights were hot. The air felt thick, the way it always does when something bigger is about to happen, even if no one says it out loud. It was a live broadcast, one of those political panels where people talk over each other, arguing about policies, blame, and broken systems. But tonight carried a different weight. The topic, criminal justice reform. On the left sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett from Texas, sharp-minded, bold-voiced, and unapologetically direct. She had no time for polite spin. On the right, former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi, polished, confident, and a familiar face in conservative legal circles. The network had promoted it for days. Two strong women, opposing views, live on national TV. You could almost hear the producers rubbing their hands backstage. Jasmine sat calm, composed, focused, the kind of quiet that people often misread as weakness. Her team warned her it could get heated, even disrespectful, but she didn't flinch. She'd been through worse, both in courtrooms and behind closed doors. Bondi arrived smiling, poised like someone ready to win over a skeptical crowd. She scanned the studio like she was taking inventory, nodding to familiar faces. She wasn't there for a conversation. She was ready for a performance. The segment opened with a question to Bondi about sentencing disparities in Florida. Her answer was smooth, clearly rehearsed, filled with phrases about law and order, personal responsibility, and cultural decline. It sidestepped the heart of the issue, but no one interrupted. Then came Crockett's turn. Asked about bias in the justice system, she leaned forward slightly, her voice low and deliberate. She cited real data, how black defendants in the same counties received longer sentences than white ones for the same crimes, how cash bail kept the poor in jail while the wealthy walked free. There was no anger in her tone, just facts, just truth. As she built toward her point, Bondi jumped in. "No disrespect, Congresswoman, but that's just not true," she said, waving her hand like swatting a gnat. "You're cherry-picking stats and ignoring the real causes of crime in our communities." The moderator tried to step in, but Bondi kept going. "People are tired of this narrative, tired of blaming the system. Maybe it's time we start talking about accountability." The studio fell silent. Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't blink. Viewers at home leaned in. Bondi smiled, thinking she'd scored a hit. But Crockett's stillness didn't mean defeat. It meant calculation. The moderator cleared her throat. "Let's allow Congresswoman Crockett to respond." Something in the room shifted. Jasmine adjusted her mic, not because it needed fixing, but because it gave her half a second. Just enough. She'd been here before. If not this exact setting, then spaces just like it. Rooms where power tried to frame her as emotional, irrational, unqualified. It never worked, but they always tried. She didn't look at Bondi. She didn't look at the cameras. Her voice was steady, measured. "Let me be very clear," she said. "What I said wasn't theory. It wasn't opinion. It came directly from Department of Justice data, sentencing project studies, court records. If we're going to have this conversation, we can't start by pretending reality doesn't exist." Bondi blinked. Maybe surprised Jasmine hadn't taken the bait. Maybe hoping she would. But Crockett wasn't there to swing wildly. She was there to land clean hits. "You say people are tired of this narrative," she continued, "but the only people who seem tired of it are the ones who never had to live it." A pause followed, the kind of silence that rarely happens on television. Then Crockett leaned in a little further. "You want accountability?" "I do too," she said. "So let's start with the police departments that refuse to report use of force. Data. The prosecutors who push plea deals on innocent people to boost conviction rates. The judges who sentence kids like adults just because their zip codes don't look like yours." Bondi shifted in her seat. Her smile faded just slightly, but she wasn't ready to back down. She interrupted again, her tone sharper this time. "With all due respect, Congresswoman, And just like that, the room braced again. But the ground had already shifted, and this time, Jasmine Crockett wasn't the one on the defensive. Pam Bondi leaned in, her tone firm. "I've spent my career locking up criminals who destroy their own neighborhoods. If you want to talk about justice, start there." The words landed with weight, not because they were true, but because they were calculated. Blame the community. Frame it as a morality issue. Position yourself as the responsible adult in the room. It was an old tactic, as familiar in politics as the podium itself. Jasmine Crockett didn't bite. "What you just said," she replied evenly, "is exactly the problem. You talk about locking people up, but you never talk about what they were locked out of long before they ever broke the law. You focus on punishment, but never on prevention. You measure justice by how many jail cells are filled, not by how many opportunities were missed." Bondi opened her mouth to respond, but the moderator quickly intervened. "Let's stay on topic, please." Too late. The audience, both in the studio and at home, had already sensed the shift. Bondi came in trying to dominate. Crockett wasn't playing defense, she was redrawing the field, and she wasn't finished. "You can't fix a system," Jasmine said, now turning toward the camera, "if you refuse to admit it's broken. And you definitely can't lead on justice if you think acknowledging racism is the same thing as being divisive." There were gasps, a few murmurs. Behind the studio glass, one of the producers dropped his pen. For the first time, Bondi didn't speak. Her lips parted like she was about to say something, but then, nothing. This wasn't the way the segment was supposed to go. Crockett, meanwhile, never raised her voice, never changed her pace. And somehow, that made every word hit harder. She wasn't trying to go viral. She was trying to be understood. And the more she spoke, the more people realized how rare that is. Someone calmly calling out power without apologizing for the discomfort it causes. Because the truth is, some rooms need to be uncomfortable before anything changes. But this wasn't the climax. It was just the warning shot. There was a stillness in the studio. Not silence exactly, but the kind of pause that comes when people are still trying to process what they've just heard. Bondi had leaned back slightly in her chair. The polish, the confidence, the sharp comebacks, they all seemed to soften. She crossed her arms, then uncrossed them. She glanced off stage, maybe toward a producer, maybe a staffer. She was searching for something. Control, perhaps. But it wasn't in the room anymore. Crockett didn't move. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't smirking. She knew better than to celebrate too early. These moments are fragile. One wrong tone, one misplaced phrase, and the narrative can shift. She wasn't going to let that happen. Not tonight. The moderator, sensing tension that could combust or collapse, tried to pivot. "Let's shift gears a little. Attorney General Bondi, how do you respond to critics who say your office has consistently resisted efforts to increase transparency in sentencing?" Bondi forced a smile. "That's simply false," she said. "Our office has been very open to reform. Real reform, not political grandstanding. But we're not going to sacrifice public safety for optics." It was a polished response, clean, practiced. But the moment had already slipped away from her. She could feel it. The audience wasn't leaning forward anymore when she spoke. They were waiting for Crockett. Jasmine didn't jump in. She waited. Let Bondi finish. Let the silence stretch. Then quietly, not confrontational, she asked, "What exactly do you mean by real reform?" Bondi blinked. "Well, for starters, we're supporting data sharing across jurisdictions. We've expanded our youth diversion programs." Jasmine cut in, firm but respectful. "Programs your office only supported after public pressure and 2 investigative reports." Another clean cut. Crockett wasn't throwing punches. She was drawing lines, facts, contradictions, receipts. Bondi exhaled. Not quite a sigh, but close. "You know what I think?" she said. "I think people like you are more focused on the narrative than the solution." It was meant to flip the script, paint Crockett as the politician, the idealist, the talker who never solves. But Crockett had heard it all before. That old idea that passion and intellect can't coexist, at least not in someone like her. She smiled, not to be charming, but to show she saw it coming. "I care about the solution," she said. "I just don't believe in solving the wrong problem." The moderator looked ready to cut to commercial. The control room was probably yelling in his ear. But he let it go. The room was too real to pause. Then Jasmine leaned forward just slightly as if preparing to speak directly to everyone watching. "You want to know what real reform looks like?" she asked. "It looks like a system where zip codes don't predict life outcomes, where prosecutors don't treat public defenders like speed bumps, where a public defender isn't carrying a caseload of 150 people and still going home at night wondering who they failed." And this time, no one interrupted. She paused. "Where judges can't justify longer sentences just because someone looks like they might reoffend, when really they're just judging fear, not facts." Now the studio was still again, but this time it wasn't discomfort. It was focus. Pam opened her mouth, then closed it. Maybe she realized she needed to regroup. Maybe she didn't have a clean counter ready. The moderator, clearly eyeing the clock, tried to steer things in a new direction. "Let's move to community policing." But Jasmine lifted a hand not to interrupt, just to finish a thought. "And real reform," she said, "means you don't silence the people closest to the problem just because they make you uncomfortable." It wasn't a mic drop. She wasn't performing. She was building something quietly, piece by piece. And then she shifted, not just in tone, but in presence. What came next wasn't just clarity. It was confrontation. A pause lingered just long enough for her last words to settle in the air. Then she turned, not to the moderator, but directly to Pam Bondi. Not with anger, not with sarcasm, just with purpose, like someone who was done walking circles around the truth. "You know," Jasmine began, "there's something personal in the way you talk about communities like mine." Bondi's expression stiffened. She wasn't used to being addressed like that, especially not on live television. "You keep talking about neighborhoods destroyed by crime," Jasmine continued. "But not once have you acknowledged what created those conditions in the first place. Redlining, underfunded schools, over-policing, predatory lending. You want to talk about law and order, but you skip the part where the law broke the order. First," the moderator leaned back in his seat. This wasn't the segment he was prepared to manage. He glanced toward the producer's booth, but no one cut the feed. Pam leaned forward, her voice sharper now. "I've spent years working with law enforcement to reduce crime. I'm not here to be lectured on outdated policies that have nothing to do with today's problems." Jasmine blinked. Her voice dropped lower, steadier. "You think redlining is outdated?" she asked. "The last redlined loan maps weren't phased out until the late 80s. You think systemic bias is ancient history? Your office opposed a bill last year to collect data on racial disparities in traffic stops. That caught Bondi off guard." She sat back slightly, her jaw tightening. "You called it bureaucratic overreach," Jasmine added. "Let me translate that for the people watching at home, you didn't want to look." The atmosphere shifted again. Viewers from cities like Toledo, Fresno, Shreveport, and Worcester were locked in. Not for spectacle, but because something rare was happening. Honesty without theatrics. Pam tried one more time. "I stand by the work my office has done to keep families safe." Jasmine didn't flinch. "You think safety only means more prisons," she said. "I think safety means a parent doesn't have to choose between paying rent and posting bail. Safety means a teenager doesn't grow up believing a routine stop could turn deadly. Safety means justice doesn't change depending on your zip code or your bank account." Pam's face was still. She seemed to realize now that every word she spoke was becoming part of a narrative she no longer controlled. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, calm, certain. "I've sat with mothers who never got a call back after their son was arrested. I've worked on cases where evidence sat untouched because the defendant didn't have a lawyer to push the system forward. You don't see that from your office. You see data, charts, crime rates. No shouting, no grandstanding. Just a steady current of truth. Truth grounded in lived reality." The camera cut to Bondi. She looked down at her notes, then back up. Her voice for the first time wavered slightly. "Well, I think we both want the same thing," she said. "Safer communities, stronger institutions." Jasmine didn't let it slide. "Wanting the same thing doesn't mean we're doing the same work," she said. "Intentions are fine, but what matters is impact." That hit. A quiet beat passed. Even the skeptics in the audience weren't checking their watches anymore. They were watching someone cut through the noise, the spin, the polish, and speak, with something harder to argue with, experience backed by facts, and Jasmine wasn't done. "Do you remember the case of Alonzo Brewer?" she asked. Pam hesitated. "You should know," Jasmine said, her voice calm but cutting. "He spent 12 months in pretrial detention, not because he was guilty, because he couldn't afford bond." Bondi blinked, saying nothing. "Your prosecutors pushed for the maximum sentence on a minor possession charge," Jasmine continued. "His public defender filed 5 motions to expedite the case, no response, not one." Pam looked thrown off, eyes narrowing slightly, maybe trying to remember if her team had prepped her for this. "He took a plea deal," Jasmine added. "Never even knew he had a legal right to see the body cam footage." The room went quiet, not stunned, just still. "That was your office," Jasmine said. "That was your policy." Pam's face tightened, but Jasmine wasn't looking to humiliate her. She was making sure no one could look away. Some moments shift the air in a room, not with noise, with gravity. This was one of those. For the first time all night, Pam Bondi didn't have a line ready. She leaned back slightly, fingers tapping the edge of her notes like they might still have answers. But the talking points, polished, rehearsed, had nothing to offer in this moment, because now it wasn't policy. It was a name, a face, a failure her office owned. Alonzo Brewer. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The moderator looked uneasy. "Attorney General Bondi, would you like to respond?" Pam cleared her throat. "I'm not familiar with that specific case," she said, trying to find steady ground. "But I'll be sure to look into it." Jasmine raised one eyebrow, not out of disrespect, but out of disbelief. "He wrote your office 4 times, she said. "His sister called your desk, twice." Pam stayed silent. "His file sat untouched for 3 months before it was even logged into the system." Bondi glanced off camera. She was trying to regroup, but Jasmine wasn't flailing or grandstanding. She was clinical, exact, and people across the country were watching. On social media, clips of the exchange were already moving fast, captioned with things like "she brought receipts, and this is what accountability looks like." In the studio, no one said a word. Pam tried again. "I take these matters seriously," she said. "I know justice isn't perfect, but we have to support our prosecutors and officers. They're doing hard work under pressure." It wasn't a bad answer. It just wasn't enough. Jasmine leaned forward again, this time softer. "And I know good officers too," she said. "I've stood beside them, but justice can't just mean defending the system. It has to mean fixing it when it fails." Then the moment no one expected. "I don't want to fight you," she said. "I want to work with you, but I can't do that if your first instinct is to dismiss the realities I've spent my life trying to change." Pam didn't respond. Maybe she didn't know how. Maybe she knew there wasn't a clean answer, and that silence said more than anything else. In the control room, the director made the call. No split screen, no cutaway. Just stay with it. 2 women eye to eye, one grounded in power, the other grounded in lived experience. The segment was only supposed to run 15 minutes. It had gone well beyond that. No one wanted it to end. The moderator had a stack of questions, but all he said was, "We'll take a short break." The screen faded to black, and across living rooms, barbershops, phones, and timelines, people weren't just watching. They were choosing sides. Because in that room, something shifted. Something bigger than either of them. The segment ended. The conversation didn't. Within minutes, the internet was dissecting every glance, every pause, every sentence. And when Jasmine Crockett said the name Alonzo Brewer, it didn't just break the format, it broke the illusion that justice was working fine. Jasmine Crockett didn't check her phone right away. After the taping, she stayed in the green room, her chief of staff across from her, just shaking her head, slow and silent. "You knew she'd come for you," the staffer said. "I was counting on it," Jasmine replied. She didn't say much else. She rarely did after interviews. Her routine was simple. Sit still, breathe, let the sprint settle. Her thoughts never scattered. They just needed time to cool. Pam Bondi left the studio fast. No follow-ups, no hallway small talk, no press scrum. Her aides moved quickly, eyes down. Her comms director was already drafting a statement, something neutral, something forgettable. But the truth? No statement was going to rewrite what people had just seen. In a diner outside Columbus, Ohio, two women in their 60s watched the rerun on a mounted screen. One leaned over her coffee and said she didn't even yell. She just laid it out like a case file. The other nodded, sipping. That's how you know she was right. Meanwhile, in a Bakersfield community center, a group of teenagers huddled around a laptop, replaying the moment. "She's the kind of leader I want to be," one girl whispered. That night, cable news dissected it from every angle. Some hosts called Crockett a force. Others called her confrontational, but even the critics admitted she didn't just hold her ground, she redrew the map. By morning, she was trending, not for theatrics, but for something rarer. Substance. One user wrote, "It's not often someone gets attacked on live TV and walks out looking like the only adult in the room." Jasmine didn't clap back. She gave a masterclass. Her first post that day was one sentence: "Facts are not attacks." Simple, direct, just like her. Later that week, she held a town hall in San Bernardino. No stage, just folding chairs and people. She listened more than she spoke. When someone asked what it felt like to confront someone like Pam Bondi on national television, she said, "It wasn't about confrontation, it was about correction. Some things just can't go unchecked anymore." The room went still. People nodded. They understood. Because whether you agreed with her or not, it was hard to argue with what she stood for: accountability without fear, truth without performance, grace under pressure, and maybe most of all, knowing when to speak and when to let silence finish the work. But there was still one thing left to say, and it mattered more than all the rest. A few days had passed since the broadcast, but the conversation hadn't faded. It had deepened, because what happened on that stage wasn't just a clash of personalities. It peeled back something bigger: how public trust is earned, and how easily it can be lost. Jasmine knew that. That's why she didn't bask in the attention. She stuck to her schedule: committee meetings, site visits, quiet calls with families caught in the system she challenged on air. She wasn't chasing headlines. She was chasing outcomes. Still, the clip kept spreading. Over 4 million views on one channel alone. Hundreds of thousands of comments, some hostile, some emotional, most thoughtful. Many came from people who didn't agree with her politics, but respected how she carried herself. One veteran from Flagstaff wrote, "I came in thinking she was another angry politician. I left realizing she was the only one who brought facts instead of fireworks." But Jasmine didn't need the praise. What she needed was for people to remember the truth behind the moment, the names, the cases, the systems that grind people down while the world debates in theory. So when she spoke at Southern University the following week, the tone was different. Less fire, more focus. "We have to stop pretending justice is one size fits all," she told the students. Because for too many people, it never fit to begin with. She looked around the room. It's not enough to say the right thing on camera. It's what you fight for when nobody's looking that counts. And that's what stuck. This wasn't about a takedown or a viral clip. Jasmine Crockett had done something harder. She stayed composed when someone tried to shrink her, and she showed the cost of that composure, the years it takes to build, the pain that sharpens it, The stories you carry that never make the news but live in your bloodstream anyway. Pam Bondi never issued a direct response. A press release came and went, something vague about miscommunication and respectful dialogue. But by then, the public had already decided whose voice echoed louder, because when someone comes at you with noise and disrespect, it's easy to snap back. It's harder to stand still, with facts, with patience, with calm that shakes the room, because it refuses to be moved. That's what Jasmine gave people, not just a moment to clap for a blueprint, a way forward. Because if this story teaches us anything, it's that power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, in the names we remember, in the questions that make people squirm, in the silences that follow truth. So if you ever find yourself doubted, interrupted, underestimated, remember this. Preparation beats provocation, and when you walk into a room not to argue but to correct, you don't need to shout. You just need to speak and let the facts do the rest.